it. And tonight we've got Matt Ueltzen, who is the manager of Restoration Ecology with the Lake County Forest Preserve District. And he wears a lot of hats, but he's also part of the team that's involved with the Oak Recovery Project, both in Lake County and region-wide. Matt has been with the Forest Preserve District for over 23 years, and in his current role, he plans and oversees various natural resources projects ranging from invasive species management to woodland restoration, native seed installation efforts, reforestation, prescribed burning, and wetland restoration. Before he joined the Forest Preserve, Matt was a biological science technician at the National Park Service at Indiana Dunes State Park, where some of us will be birding on May 1st as an extension of our Goose Pond, Indiana trip. Matt holds a Bachelor of Science in Animal Ecology from Iowa State University and a Master of Science in Biology from Northeastern Illinois University. We're thrilled to have him. Sorry for the delay. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Rena, and thank you everyone for inviting me. I'm going to share my screen now, if that's all right.
I think I get that set up right.
Yay!
Hey,
So hopefully that's visible for you and everyone.
you got it.
So again, thank you for inviting me. Again, my name is Matt Ueltzen. I'm the manager of Restoration Ecology with the Lake County Forest Preserve. Another person was actually scheduled to give this talk earlier, but they had to make other arrangements. They wouldn't be able to make it. So I'm trying to adapt their program and try to be true to what the intent was for their talk, but also interject some information about Lake County and the Forest Preserve specifically. So bear with me, and we'll have time for questions at the end, I believe, or you can ask them in the chat along the way. So the title of the talk is Oaks Need Our Help, and oaks and oak ecosystems are being threatened by a variety of factors. Going to talk a little bit about why oaks are here, what issues are they facing, why does it matter, or why should we care about oaks, and then a little bit about what you can do to help oaks. So jumping right in, for thousands of years, the Chicago region has been formed by ice, and glaciers have created the landscape that we have here today. It carved Lake Michigan, it's pushed up moraine ridges that create and separate our watersheds, but it also left us with a relatively flat expanse, which has led to the rise of prairies in the prairie state, which you can see kind of shown on the yellow areas of the map here. Those flat areas have allowed fires to form the landscape or transform the landscape, as well as these flat expanses have allow fires to move easily across those landscapes because of the topography or lack thereof. Frequent fires kept down the woody vegetation, resulted in prairie, as we discussed. And as fire encountered these glacial ridges, it became more patchy, and in these areas, woodlands tended to become more prominent. Rivers acted as natural fire breaks, and so many forests and woodlands also appeared on the eastern sides of rivers as the prevailing winds carried fires from the east to the west. From the west to the east. This combination of topography, fire, and climate resulted in a number of natural community types, including the different types of oak woodlands and forests we have. These maps show the different forest compositions in the 1830s. You can see that oaks were the dominant tree species at that time. We know this because of natural land or public land surveys that were conducted at the time. Surveyors moved across the landscape every square mile and mapped out sections and townships at that time. And while those people were not naturalists, they did have some background in nature and trees, and recorded information about the landscape that they were traveling through. So we know a little bit about the trees that were there, and where the rivers were, and where there were wetlands, based on those reports from those early surveys. We'll notice that there's how dense the oak distribution is, and how they made up our forests and hillsides and bordered meadows and prairies and lined our waterways. Again, we know this from those early land surveys. This is an excerpt from that, and I'll read it to you. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it's difficult to read, but it says, land rolling, soil first rate, timber, bur oak, and black oak openings, and is dated December 11th, 1839. And this is from the Libertyville area. So we know based on this account that when they talk about openings and bur oak and black oak by the composition, we can understand that the areas around Libertyville were probably more open and savanna-like as opposed to being dense forest. So here specifically for Lake County, in 2010, the district worked with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to map the historic from the 1830s and current from 2010 extent of oak-dominated communities in the county. And we were able to interpret the aerial photos for the 2010 images. In this 80-year time period, the county lost almost 164,000 acres of oak-dominated communities. Of the remaining 12%, only 14 blocks of woodland that are greater than 100 acres exist. So what's happening to oaks and why are they in trouble and disappearing from our landscape? Well, our oldest oaks are kind of reaching the end of their lifespan, and there are very few younger oaks to replace them. There's also lots of other stressors affecting oaks and oak ecosystems, such as the lack of regeneration, lack of age diversity in these populations, changing forest composition with increased concentrations of shade-tolerant trees, also fragmentation of regional ecosystems, the introduction and spread of invasive species, as well as diseases and pests, and expanded populations of herbivores, specifically deer. Pollution, including increases in fertilizers and other nutrients, as well as climate change, are also playing a role. And I'm going to touch on a few of these in greater detail. The oak ecosystems that remain today tend to be highly fragmented, thus making it harder for the transfer of oak seeds from one location to the other, also making it difficult for wildlife to pass in severely degraded and fragmented landscapes. Can lead to poor ecosystem health. Large parcels of oak ecosystems are needed to support broad species diversity, and some species have specific needs for ecosystem size in order to survive, especially rarer species and forest interior species. Unfortunately, the barriers that fragment oak ecosystems are often permanent features of the urban landscape, such as highways or transportation corridors. In some cases, there may be opportunities to reconnect ecosystems through management, design features, or acquisition. It's important to note that developed areas containing oaks can provide important connections or buffers for remnant oak ecosystems. And these include backyards, corporate campuses, and trail systems. This is just another chart showing the changes in oak ecosystem sizes and parcels, as they've changed through the years, and the loss of not only total acres, but also we don't have as many larger blocks of habitat at this time. Oops. The title of this is that oaks grew up with fire, but I think it's more appropriate to say that oak ecosystems have evolved with and in many ways depend on fire. Oaks respond well to fire. Prior to European settlement, Native Americans used fire to manage the landscape. These fires help to create and sustain our native oak woodlands. Oak trees have corky bark, while maple, basswood, and ash have thin bark. And we can see that how that can impact and restrict the ability of those trees to establish in areas where there's frequent fire, because the thin bark doesn't protect them as the thick bark of oak trees does. Also, walking in the fall under canopy oaks, you'll hear the crunchy, thick accumulation of leaves. These oak leaves are considered pyrogenic, meaning that they promote fire, and they help regenerate oak ecosystems because of that fire. When you compare oak leaves to maple leaves, you notice that oak leaves are thicker and more leathery. When they dry out, they curl, so there's lots of airspace in between them, whereas maple leaves tend to be a lot higher moisture content, and as they fall, they rot very easily and do not promote fire in these communities. So oaks can promote oaks, but the lack of fire and maples and other species like that can actually restrict fire and lead to less oaks and more maples, and changing the trajectory of the forest. Also, invasive species, seedlings and saplings can be restricted by the use of fire. Unfortunately, changing land uses, our loss of connection to natural areas, and fire as a natural process, along with local, state, and federal policies, coupled with marketing campaigns on fire prevention, such as Smokey Bear, have led to widespread fire suppression and the cascading impacts caused by excluding this important process. Oh, I'm sorry. Non-native invasive plant species have led to reductions in biological diversity, which is a key driver in ecosystem health. Non-native invasive plant species compete with native plants for sunlight and water and soil resources, and can quickly replace them in the landscape while increasing shade and even altering soil chemistry. Two of the most abundant and destructive invasive species in the Chicago region are European buckthorn and garlic mustard. Other problematic woody invaders include non-native honeysuckles, Callery pear, multiflora rose, Japanese barberry, and oriental bittersweet. Other herbaceous invaders include Canada thistle, teasel, reed canary grass, and Japanese hedge parsley. You see the understory in this photo is almost entirely made up of honeysuckle and buckthorn with little to no light available to ground layer species. Unfortunately, buckthorn and honeysuckle comprise over 40% of all the tree stems counted in the Chicago region, as noted by a 2020 regional tree census. And buckthorn alone is 36%. I'd like to give you some good information about Lake County, but unfortunately, Lake County is the most impacted by buckthorn out of all the counties in the region. Here, more than 50% of our trees are European buckthorn. Buckthorn and honeysuckle outcompete oaks and other native species by restricting light and making the soil less hospitable for native oaks. I could talk at length about how damaging European buckthorn is to our ecosystems. It reduces native species cover and diversity. It's not really a food source for native wildlife. It's allelopathic, meaning that it leaches chemicals into the soil that prevents other plants from establishing. Its leaf litter is very high in nitrogen, which speeds decomposition, which impacts soil arthropod communities, tree roots, erosion, food webs, soil pH. It's also been noted that bird diversity decreases as buckthorn increases at a site, and birds nesting in exotic shrubs experience higher levels of nest predation than birds nesting in native trees and shrubs. Specifically, I'm aware of one research study that concluded that dense buckthorn thickets were a sink for wood thrush, meaning that they do not produce enough offspring to replace the natural mortality within that local population. Buckthorn also contains a chemical called amodin, which is highly impactful to wildlife, especially amphibians, our frogs, toads, and salamanders. It causes malformations and increased mortality amongst the developing larval stages or tadpole stages of frogs and salamanders. Buckthorn berries are mainly dispersed by birds, and the seeds can easily spread from urban sites to natural areas. Buckthorn forms dense thickets in which very few other species will grow, thus creating a monoculture of the invasive shrub, causing long-term difficulties for reestablishing oak ecosystems. Oops, sorry. There's also shade is impacting our oak ecosystems. Oaks need light to establish and grow, and they do not grow in low light levels, especially when invasive species are dominant, or even when dominated by native species such as sugar maples, elms, ashes, basswoods, and like. Without fire or other natural disturbances that would reduce densities or create gaps, the canopy becomes closed and not enough light reaches the forest floor, and small oaks cannot thrive. In these instances, seedlings or oak seedlings persist for about a year or two until the resources of the acorn are used up, and then they simply shrivel up and die. Other more shade-tolerant species, such as, again, maple, ash, and basswood, begin to overtake the oak ecosystems and crowd out the native shade-intolerant species. The photos you see here are fisheye or hemispherical photos that are used to analyze the canopy. We can input these images into a computer program called Gap Light Analyzer, and it'll analyze how much light is being transmitted through that canopy and give us estimates for canopy closure. What you can see is the photo on the left has about 85% canopy closure. That's far too high for oaks, and especially oak seedlings to germinate and persist for a long period of time. They really need something more in the 30 to 50% openness, which you see on the right-hand side. And these are photos from forest preserve areas in Lake County. Specifically from our research in Lake County, we found that in surveying our areas that oaks are aging, and there are very few young oaks in the understory to take their place. You can see sugar maples and elms dominate the sapling layer and will eventually replace the canopy oaks if no action is taken. You can see that in the photo. We have some large oaks, and pretty much all the other smaller trees in that photo are sugar maples. So what we're left is a situation that you see here in this graph. We have on the right-hand side lots of large canopy oak trees, but very few saplings and small oaks. Conversely, in shade-tolerant species such as those maples, ashes, and basswoods, there's very few large trees, as you can see here, but there's a whole lot of smaller trees waiting in that cohort to take over when these older trees pass along. So when you combine these two graphs, what you see is lots of large oaks and very few large other trees. But as these trees age out and die, the graph will kind of slowly shift from left to right, and what you'll be left with is a total shift in the trajectory and the composition of these forests, where it'll be very few oaks and a whole lot of other species, and essentially we're going to lose our oak ecosystems. So this is a typical shot, a photo under our oak ecosystems. Unfortunately, the large trees are oaks, but you can see there's very little light that's being transmitted to the forest floor. And as a result, there's very little vegetation growing there either. It's basically just leaf litter and a handful of plants here and there. The average light transmission in Lake County in our preserves was unfortunately less than 15%. And again, oaks really require that 30 to 50% light transmission for growth and sustaining and regeneration. We found that oak saplings were lacking. Only 2 out of 1,000 saplings were oaks, and this represented less than 2% of the cover in these communities. We also found that native shrubs were very uncommon and not producing a fruit. And we found that previous restoration and management has been able to increase plant diversity in the ground layer vegetation. So getting back to the regional issues that are facing trees or oaks. Oaks are affected by a number of pests and diseases, mostly related to insects or fungal pathogens. Some of these pests and pathogens are currently present in the Chicago region, and some examples include the two-line chestnut borer, oak wilt, gypsy moth, sudden oak death, and bur oak blight. Some are new or invasive pests and pathogens, but others are naturally occurring, but are gaining momentum due to their ability to impact stressed trees, and trees are stressed from a variety of reasons, which we've talked about already. So why does it matter and that we're losing oaks and oak ecosystems? Well, so many animals, insects, fungi, and rare birds depend on our oak trees. And oaks support far more wildlife than other trees. Oak trees support resting spots for migratory birds. In Chicago alone, there are over 250 different types of birds that migrate through our region yearly. The red-headed woodpecker, which you see on the upper left-hand side, requires large open woodlands for habitat. Their numbers have declined as standing snags or large dead trees have become less common. The wood frog is a solitary inhabitant of mature moist forests, and the blue-spotted salamander as well is common in moist hardwood forests and northern flatwoods dominated by swamp white oaks. The salamander burrows under rocks, logs, and mats of moss and vegetation. Its greatest threat is urban sprawl, according to the Illinois Natural History Survey, as well as emodin, which is the chemical found in buckthorn that is causing those malformations and increased mortality of that species. Also want to mention the black-billed cuckoo, which is found in woodlands with moderate understory. It's listed as threatened in a number of northern Illinois counties, including DuPage, Lake, Lee, and McHenry. More than 500 butterflies and moths eat oak leaves, and birds depend on these insects for food. Millions of migratory birds pass through the Chicago region that do eat these insects and depend on them. Wildlife also depend on the insects for food and acorns for seed, but also the fruits and seeds produced by other species in the oak ecosystems that develop with and under oaks. If we lose the oaks, we will lose many of these other plants and animal species. Oak ecosystems have more invertebrates living in the leaf litter than other forested ecosystems, and they have more fungi as well. The larger photo on the right-hand side is a banded hair streak. If we lose the oaks and hickories that are the host plant for this species, the species will decline and be lost as well. So just one example of those 500 butterflies and moths that depend on oaks. And oaks are really part of our natural heritage, and this is one of the reasons why we should care about them. They contribute to making our communities desirable. There's research that's been done that shows that exposure to green spaces improves mental and physical health. Children with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, or ADHD, are better able to concentrate, complete tasks, and follow directions after playing in natural settings. Access to parks encourages more physical activity and reduces stress levels. And urban trees create an environment that encourages recreational activity, walking, biking, and running. Woodlands and natural landscapes create opportunities for socialization in public spaces. And a study found that residents living in areas with higher density of street trees were prescribed fewer antidepressants. So again, oaks are in trouble, but there are a number of organizations that are working together to counteract that, and including the Lake County Forest Preserve District, as well as the Chicago Region Trees Initiative and Morton Arboretum, and many other conservation agencies in our area. And we're looking to make a difference in this effort, and we hope that you can play a part in that as well. So what are some things that you can do? Well, specifically on your property, we're asking that people think about planting oaks and other native species and removing invasive plants, specifically buckthorn. You can see this is a resource that's been developed by Chicago Region Trees Initiative, as well as other partners, including the Forest Preserve. You can see listed on the bottom there. But we have work to develop this resource to help people understand options for replacing buckthorn with other native species. So this is just one example of a resource that has been provided or been produced to try to promote the use of native species in these home landscapes. This was, excuse me. This was developed in-house. That some of the artwork is actually from the Lake County Forest Preserve, but we're trying to provide some options for what can be planted in native landscapes that will help support native wildlife. By no means is this an exhaustive list. There's literally hundreds of other plant species that could be planted in a home landscape. This is really just to try to whet the appetite and give people options for thinking about how to replace that non-native shrub and thicket in your backyard with some healthy alternatives that will support native wildlife. I also encourage you to think about certifying your property as with conservation at home. This is a program that is operated by WOODLANDS, but you can, through a series of requirements, be certified as a conservation at home property, and you get this plaque or sign, which you see here, to display to your neighbors in your neighborhood, kind of promoting use of native plants and conservation practices on your home. I'll also note that there are programs for conservation at work and conservation at school. If you're interested in promoting conservation habits at those places as well, and you can get some recognition for that with the plaque or that sign to, again, help engage your neighbors and promote healthy home landscapes. to your community. There's also been a series of other brochures developed by Chicago Region Trees Initiative called Healthy Homes, and there's one called Healthy Habitats, but it just provides a little more information about how to care for your home landscape and make decisions that will promote better ecosystem health, not only for your neighborhood and your community and your home, but how that affect and how that contributes regionally to initiatives such as buckthorn eradication or oak ecosystem recovery or supporting wildlife. Again, we encourage you to be a steward of your own land and think about native plants and invasive species and what you can do to control that and manage these areas to make them more beneficial to natives and native wildlife. But not only on your own property, I would encourage you to think about volunteering as a steward for a local natural area. The Forest Preserve District has lots of opportunities for volunteering to do a variety of monitoring of native wildlife, as well as removing invasive species and being involved in prescribed burn programs. And many other organizations in our area would love to have your help as a volunteer as well. Open Lands has a program called Tree Keepers, and then I'm sure there's many other local agencies in your community that would very much need your support and volunteerism. One other thing I want to mention is that several years ago, the state of Illinois and the governor declared October as Oaktober. So it is a statewide recognition and celebration of our oaks and their heritage and our natural heritage. We're helping to raise awareness of oaks, and there are many Oaktober events across the community. I would encourage you to consider hosting an Oaktober community event in your community, or think about participating in one of the various ones that exist. And those are there's a list of events that will be kept by Chicago Region Trees Initiative on their website. I can tell you that within the Forest Preserve, as the past couple of years, we've had events for October that included a native tree and shrub sale in the fall. This year, it will be the first weekend in October, and we'll be going to host it at our general office building in Libertyville. But it's an opportunity to find a source for native trees and shrubs that may not be available in kind of big box stores or other garden centers. Just an opportunity to source these materials if you'd like them in your home landscape. Again, I can't stress enough the damage that's caused to our ecosystems, and specifically oak ecosystems, by buckthorn. And I just wanted to point out some new resources that we've developed at the Lake County Forest Preserve District to hopefully encourage more buckthorn management and hopefully eradication for the health and sustainability of our natural landscapes. So some of those resources include refreshed web resources. There's information on invasive species, replanting with natives. We've also created some video series for herbicide tips and tricks, as well as identification tips for identifying buckthorn and other invasive species. We've also recently created a buckthorn-free garden flag, which is free to anyone who applies for one. You just have to get on our website and fill out a short application form, self-reports, and submit some photos of your home landscape showing that it's buckthorn-free, and you're eligible to receive a buckthorn-free garden flag that you can post on your landscape and hopefully encourage and promote buckthorn-free landscapes and encourage your neighbors to do the same. Again, we have printed resources of the Healthy Hedges brochure, as well as creating an invasive species removal in progress sign for people to use at their homes. The back side of the sign, it actually has some talking points. So if you are doing some buckthorn removal, around your home, and neighbors are questioning what you're doing and why, we've given you some talking points and to engage further engage those neighbors, and hopefully trying to expand buckthorn management to those sites as well, their landscapes. Lastly, we've created an herbicide quick start guide. We recognize that many people have questions about herbicides and how to use them for buckthorn. So we've created this resource in hard copy, as well as, and it's also available electronically on our website, but it's free to anyone to use, to hopefully again promote oak ecosystem management by reducing invasive species. So with that, I will take any questions.
Here we go. Can you hear me now? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I have a couple of questions in here, but I want to start with one thing. So the oak recovery system, oak recovery project, which is region wide,
Mhm.
is that also including, obviously these are resources for homeowners that you just went through, that, which is great, and which we're going to have to get a bunch of these to hand out at our when we're meeting in person. So I'm glad to know about that. But what else is being done region wide to, open up the canopy? Is this something that is done individually by individual forest preserves, which I know you have to do the work, but I'm still trying to get my hands around what's being done at the, I don't know, the government level to try to restore the oak ecosystems.
Yeah, well, the concept that our woodlands are too shady and overcrowded is not something that's new to the conservation community, and it's not something that's unique to Lake County. There's other agencies are working on this issue as well, and trying to find ways to increase canopy gaps or create gaps in in those canopies to allow more light to come through. There's programs in Southern Illinois and the Shawnee called Let the Sun Shine In. There's lots of resources from the academic community that know about, especially for silviculture and growing trees, about how oaks grow and the light requirements that they need. So this is something that's not just a Lake County initiative. This is a region-wide, statewide, as well as just the entire, I would say, eastern forest, that anywhere there's oaks, they're probably facing these same issues.
So, but I mean, what if you give me 5 things that are being done? Opening up the canopy, eradicating buckthorn. What are 3 other major kinds of things that would be done in these projects?
Trying to restore hydrology, trying to reintroduce fire as a natural process to these landscapes, and then introducing native species where they're lacking. So adding native seeds and replacing essentially that converting that barren leaf litter to native plants, as well as trying to reestablish a native shrub layer that is lacking because it's been completely eradicated by the buckthorn taking over everything. That many of our woodlands are missing that component of that understory or shrub layer of vegetation. So adding flowering and fruiting trees for supporting wildlife. There's more than a dozen native shrubs that should be present in these communities that just aren't, because everything's been obliterated by buckthorn and honeysuckle and other invasive woody species.
Is there one kind of signature forest reserve property where you've had a lot of success, or is it the most active one, or can you point us like, oh, here's like a model project?
Sure. So our project started in about 2013 and ran through 2018 and involved some of the preserves along the southern portion of the display.
That's fine.
We conducted different treatments for these areas. Some where it was just removing the buckthorn only, others that involved different levels of canopy openness and different strategies to achieve that canopy openness. And we've taken data on that and we're recording that, and we're continuing to monitor those through time, as well as we planted oaks and other shrubs in these areas, and we're monitoring those as they're changing over time. But I would say that any of those preserves along that are the examples of that, and show multiple different treatments in those areas. But if I had to pick one, I would say probably MacArthur Woods.
MacArthur, okay.
Mhm.
I'm feeling a field trip coming on here. It would be great to see. I think everybody would be interested. Okay, some questions here. Sorry, I dominated that, but do you have to live in, Sandra asked, do you have to live in Lake County to get a flag? A buckthorn?
Unfortunately, at this time, yes.
Oh.
That because they're funded by a donation from our the Preservation Foundation of the Lake County Forest Preserve. So we're at this time we're limiting it to only Lake County residents, but
Okay.
anyone in Lake County eligible.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Jill asked, Doug Talamy mentions dwarf how do you pronounce that? Chinquapin oak in his Nature of Oaks book. If I plant one of these trees in my subdivision quarter-acre yard, am I helping?
Yes, I would say that in Lake County, at least, Chinkapin oak is very rare, or probably wasn't present. It's mostly only here in planted areas, or it only exists here because it's planted. So there might be some other options for trees that are more appropriate or native to Lake County, but planting any oak is beneficial to some degree.
Okay. Is there a good source for oak seedling culture so homeowners can be successful? This is, I don't know who this came from. So homeowners can be successful with newly planted oaks, pruning, fertilization, ways to protect from browsing critters. That was a multi-part question. So is there a good
Sure.
source for oak seedling culture? That's the first one.
Yes, there are a couple of local nurseries that specialize in native trees and shrubs. We primarily purchase trees from Possibility Place Nursery in Moni, Illinois, as well as Majestic Oaks Nursery in Spring Grove. That's where a lot of our plant material comes from that we purchase for our reforestation projects, and we specify that for our projects that everything has to be local genotype, and those local nurseries specialize in that. So these are the plants that are from our area and adapted to our soils and climates, and they have done well for us and performed well for us in the past. And those are more of a wholesale operation, but they may be able to they may sell individual trees if you're interested. They have some online resources to do that. And I will also say that the trees that we purchase for our October events, or that we're collaborating with for that event, those trees are coming from local areas here and from the same nurseries. Excuse me.
I just put those two sources in the chat. Okay. The same person, again, I'm sorry, I can only see this iPad, is let's see, asking about pruning, fertilization, and how to protect the trees from critters.
Well, the good thing about oaks is that they're, again, adapted to this area and this landscape and our soils and climate, so they really don't require a whole lot of pruning. In fact, having those lower branches on them protects the trees, as well as gives them a little bit more energy for growing faster. So I would say that if you have oaks, you might be interested or thinking that you need to trim the lower branches. They're healthy for the plant. They leave them on there. In terms of pruning, you don't want to prune oaks during the growing season. You want to wait till it's dormant in the winter to make any pruning cuts for existing, especially larger trees. Pruning in the growing season will create pathways for pathogens and pests, and really cause undue stress to those trees. In terms of protecting them from critters, for the most part, we don't have much issue with that other than deer. And for that, we simply put up a cage or fence around the trees and leave it there as long as possible. If for us, that might be 10 to 15 years, depending on the size of trees that we're planting and the effort that it requires to do large scale plantings and protecting them, that actually removing the fencing kind of exposes those trees to potential damage from deer. So we try to leave it on as long as possible. But in a home landscape, I would think that if you kept it on there for a year or two, that's probably good enough. And again, letting them grow and having those lower branches will kind of protect them from getting rubbed by deer as well.
Okay, a few more questions here. Seems like Daniel Wright Woods is active in oak preservation relative to the number of trees chopped down. You remember I said that to you the first time I spoke to you. What kinds of trees were cut down?
It depended on the area. There were some areas that contain northern flatwoods communities, which are primarily dominated by swamp white oaks and are really kind of swamp areas that are located in uplands surrounded by oak woodlands. In some of those areas, some of the trees that are more typically associated with floodplains, such as silver maples and cottonwoods, have invaded those areas and essentially made them uninhabitable to the amphibians that need those ponds for reproduction and for the rearing their young, because of the leaf litter that those species leave in those places and how it decomposes. It really robs that water of oxygen that those developing salamander embryos need. So we've been a little bit more aggressive in trying to reduce those floodplain species from northern flatwoods communities. But we're also looking at trying to do general thinning or removal of sugar maples and maple ashes and basswoods and some other areas to create those canopy gaps in the more upland areas.
Okay,
Hopefully
we'll
that
take
answers your question.
a couple more questions. Is climate change, this is from Sunny, is climate change influencing which oaks may be more successful? My understanding is that white oaks are less favorable going forward.
It's a good question. I would say that we don't know quite yet. There are the oaks trees species that we have here in Lake County or in Illinois. Their ranges are pretty extensive. So I think we will see a shifting of these communities slightly with climate change. But at this point, I don't know if there's any clear winners or losers, or we know exactly how it's going to impact them in the long run. I mean, white oak is found all the way as far south as Texas. So even if we have some climate change and warming, we would still expect to see some white oak here. We might see less red oak, but again, it exists further south of us, and we expect that even with shifting populations and population centers, that we would still have the same species that we have now.
Okay, we'll take one more. This is from Maureen. She says, I think you answered some of this, but there has been some concern about the removal of cottonwood trees at the preserves. Can you speak to the necessity of this? What are the specific measures being done in the area of hydrology at the preserves?
Sure. I think I touched on it a little bit. Trying to remove cottonwoods where they've expanded outside of the historic floodplain and are invading those northern flatwoods communities. certainly we're not trying to eradicate cottonwoods by any means. They are a native tree. They belong in our environment, but they are we're historically restricted to those floodplain areas or dune ridges along Lake Michigan, actually. But they primarily were not a component of those northern flatwoods, and we're trying to reduce their impact that they're having on those northern flatwoods communities. Again, because of the shading and the leaf litter that they deposit in those ponds, as well as if anyone is familiar with cottonwoods or seen one that was cut down, they do translocate a lot of water. In fact, if you were to cut into one, water would almost pour out of them at times, depending on the season of the year. So they do suck up a lot of water and are impacting those flatwoods communities by drawing them down through the roots as well.
I think that question came in as you were talking about that. So thank you for that. Okay. One more. This is from Carla. This is controversial, but I'm going to say, we have heard that oaks prefer to grow near each other and communicate through their root systems, which there was just something that debunked that whole thing, I think. Do some oak species prefer this more than others?
I don't know about a preference, but we are understanding more about oaks and just general tree root systems, that many trees and tree roots are interconnected in the soil. And I don't know, again, I don't know that I would call it a preference, but I think it's just a common occurrence that tree roots are interconnected and interwoven with each other.
Okay. I was referring to, this whole thing about the trees communicating with each other. There was I just read something about a new journal article that took a look at the research and they're not so sure. So it might not have applied to oaks. Okay. Well, I want to thank you very much. Sorry, Maureen, we've spent a lot of time taken a lot of Matt's time tonight. So I will forward this one last question to you, Matt, afterward.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay. So if Sunny wants to unmute everyone, and I think Matt, first of all, for your knowledge, next of all, for pinch hitting for Brandon. We appreciate that. And where can I get some of this literature at the Forest Preserve headquarters?
Yes. If you contact me, I can make a stockpile available for you in the group, or we can figure out.
Usually when our in-person meetings, we have this stuff out, and I think people would be very interested. So we'll follow up with that. Okay, I want to.
I was just to say my contact information is on the screen as well. So if there are further questions, I'm happy to respond to those if you have them.
Okay, whoops, I just lost your picture. Okay, well, thank you. I let everybody say thank you very much, Matt, and again.